A virgin was sold to a cruel millionaire. But what happened that night shocked everyone. The afternoon sun bathed the small town of Vermont in a golden hue, casting long shadows across the worn rooftops and rolling fields that stretched toward the horizon. But inside a modest wooden cabin near the edge of the woods, Emily Morgan couldn't find the strength to admire the beauty. She stood frozen by the window, her hand gripping the frame, her heart pounding with painful intensity. Her gaze was fixed on her father, Richard Morgan, a weary, gaunt man whose face bore the deep lines of loss and failure. He sat silently in an old armchair, his cloudy eyes filled with helplessness. "I can't do this, Dad." Emily's voice trembled. "Are you really asking me to marry Julian Blackwell?" That name sliced through the silence like a blade. Emily didn't need to live in New York to know who Julian was, the ruthless CEO of Blackwell Holdings. People called him the heartless king of Wall Street, a man who never backed down, who built an empire without mercy. Richard lowered his head, his voice hoarse. "We have no other option. If we don't, Blackwell will take everything, this house, our land, and even Caleb's future." Emily's hands clenched. Caleb, her 8-year-old brother, still believed the world was kind. He didn't know what it meant to lose a home, a life. She couldn't let that happen. "But I'll belong to someone I don't even know, someone I could never love," she whispered. "Julian Blackwell isn't marrying you out of love," Richard said quietly. "It's a deal, a transaction. Marrying you is the only way he'll erase the debt and let us live." Emily took a step back, as if the wind had knocked her down. She had once dreamed of another life, a small interior design studio, sunlight pouring in, freedom. But now it was all ashes. At last, she asked, barely above a whisper, "When?" "Tomorrow morning. A car will pick you up." Dawn came cloaked in Vermont fog. Emily stood in a pale blue dress, her suitcase at her feet, staring at the house one last time. Caleb ran out and threw his arms around her. "Are you going far away?" She knelt down, whispering, "I'm going so you can stay here. I'll always protect you no matter what." As the car pulled away from the only home she'd ever known, Emily watched her memories fade behind the glass. Her mother's laugh, her old school, winters by the fireplace. All gone. Blackwell Estate loomed above the Hudson Valley like a fortress, cold and imposing under the fading sun. Its gray stone walls, towering gates, and encircling woods gave it the look of a cursed kingdom. Emily stepped out of the car, heart frozen. The heavy front doors creaked open, and a stern butler bowed. "Miss Morgan, Mr. Blackwell is expecting you." She entered the grand foyer, a world of marble floors, wrought iron fixtures, and oil portraits of long-gone ancestors. The air smelled of old wood and dried roses, thick with history and shadows. Before she could gather herself, a door at the end of the hall opened. Julian Blackwell stepped in, tall, commanding, eyes like silver storms. Dressed in a black suit, his presence filled the room like thunder. Emily squared her shoulders. She would not appear weak. He stopped in front of her. They stared at each other in silence. No smile, no welcome. Then his voice cut through the stillness, deep and razor-sharp. "From this moment on, you belong to me." Emily said nothing. She knew that from now on, her life was no longer her own. The night before the wedding, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat alone in her childhood bedroom, curled into an old wooden chair, staring into the darkness beyond the window pane. Vermont was as quiet as ever, only the whisper of wind in the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. But inside her, a storm was raging. She wondered, when she wore that wedding gown in the morning, would she still be herself? Or just a silent figure passed like a possession from one man's hands to another's? In her mind, the image of Julian Blackwell loomed like a shadow. cold, powerful, devoid of emotion. She would be walking into his world, a place where she didn't belong, a world void of tenderness. And in that moment, Emily realized what she was about to lose wasn't just her freedom, it was herself. The church bells echoed across the dazzling skyline of New York City, but to Emily Morgan, they did not signal joy. They sounded like the final toll of her old life. She stepped out of the luxury car in a pristine white gown, her hair swept into a perfect updo, her face veiled in delicate lace. No one could see the silent tears swelling beneath her eyes, hidden behind layers of fabric and expectation. In front of St. Vincent's Cathedral, the crowd buzzed, elite guests from high society, politicians, investors, allies of Julian Blackwell. They smiled, toasted, and whispered about the glamorous union about to unfold. Only Emily knew this was a sentence, not a celebration. Her father, Richard Morgan, gently took her hand. "Be strong," he murmured, though his voice trembled. "It'll be okay." She gave a slight nod but said nothing. Each step down the aisle felt like a heartbeat toward oblivion. She barely registered the music, the flowers, or the faces. All she saw was the tall silhouette of Julian Blackwell waiting at the end, cold, unreadable. He wasn't a groom. He was a negotiator finalizing the most strategic deal of his career. As the priest began the vows, Emily heard her own breath falter. Behind her, she caught her father's anxious glance. Farther back, Caleb sat innocently, too young to understand what his sister was sacrificing. "Julian Blackwell," the priest intoned, "do you take Emily Morgan to be your lawfully wedded wife, in sickness and in health, in wealth or in poverty? Till death do you part?" Julian answered instantly, his voice low and sharp. "I do." No hesitation, no warmth, just a line chiseled into stone. Then it was Emily's turn. She inhaled shakily, her hands trembling. "I do." A cold ring slid onto her finger, a hollow kiss pressed to her forehead, not tender, not loving, just sealing a contract. Applause filled the cathedral. Emily did not smile. She had nothing left to smile for. Rain poured as the wedding car rolled through the night. Droplets tapped against the roof like echoes of her hollow heart. Outside, city lights streaked across the window, dazzling, distant, and empty. When the car stopped before Blackwell Estate, Emily swallowed hard. The mansion loomed like a beast waiting to devour her. Stone walls veiled in ivy, towering windows, and the wind howling through the trees made the air feel thick and unwelcoming. Julian said nothing as they entered the grand foyer. He gave a curt nod to the staff, then looked at her. "Follow me." She obeyed in silence, ascending the grand staircase. Portraits lined the walls, their painted eyes watching her pass. There was no laughter, no toasts, only cold silence. Their bridal suite was vast and glacial, dominated by a bed draped in white silk. A small fireplace crackled faintly in the corner, the only source of warmth. Julian removed his coat, hung it neatly on a chair, then turned toward her. "You're still a virgin, aren't you?" he asked bluntly. Emily flushed, her hand gripping the fabric of her gown. "Yes." His lip curled faintly, but his eyes remained ice. "At least you're not used merchandise." The words pierced her like needles. Julian stepped closer, scanning her as if appraising an object. "This marriage is just a formality. You're my wife on paper. Don't mistake it for anything else." Emily swallowed. "I understand." "There are 3 rules," he said, voice clipped. 1, don't interfere with my business. 2, in public, you'll play the perfect wife. 3, he stepped in, voice lowering. "You're never to enter the West Wing." She frowned. "What's in there?" His eyes darkened. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to." He turned. "You may sleep. I won't touch you." She stood still, mind spinning. "You don't want to?" she asked quietly. Julian paused. "This marriage is a transaction, Emily, not love." The door closed behind him. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets. Tears slid down her cheeks in silence. She was Julian Blackwell's wife, but she had never felt so utterly alone. Emily stood still in the bridal suite, where everything was perfect. So perfect, it felt cold. Heavy emerald velvet drapes fell from the soaring ceiling. The stone fireplace was intricately carved, and the polished wood floors gleamed under the soft glow of a crystal chandelier. The room radiated wealth, but not warmth. Every detail was flawless, like a five-star hotel. But it also felt like a showroom, where everything was in its place, but nothing was meant to be truly lived in. Emily walked toward the window. Outside, the garden lay in darkness, surrounded by towering iron fences. She felt as though she stood in the center of a grand cage, beautiful, expensive, but still a cage. All she had now was the weight of a wedding ring on her finger, not a symbol of love, but a mark of possession. She was no longer Emily Morgan, she was Julian Blackwell's wife. A hollow title, a role she had never chosen to play. Emily hadn't just lost her old life, she had lost herself within these stone walls and vowless vows, a prisoner in a gilded cage. Emily woke in an unfamiliar space. The pale morning light filtered through heavy drapes, casting a dull glow across the soaring ceiling. She lay still on the white silk sheets, but her heart felt empty, cold. Her first night at Blackwell Estate had passed without a word, without a touch. No good night, no warmth. Just silence and the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in the dark. On her third day at Blackwell Estate, Emily began to wander through the vast mansion, not out of curiosity alone, but because she couldn't bear the sense of being confined. The estate was a grand, silent maze. Long carpeted hallways, vaulted ceilings, gleaming chandeliers. It all should have felt majestic, but instead it felt like a place where joy had once existed and died long ago, leaving only echoes of ghosts behind. She passed dozens of portraits, generations of the Blackwell family, each painted with the same cold silver eyes and rigid expression. Then she came upon a smaller portrait, hung quietly at the end of the east corridor. It was of a young woman in a plain black dress, her soft curls framing a face full of unspoken sorrow. Beneath the frame was a small engraved plaque, Charlotte Blackwell. The name clung to Emily's thoughts. She'd seen it somewhere before. Spotting the housekeeper walking by, she asked, "Excuse me, who is the girl in that painting?" Helen paused. Her face changed subtly, from neutral to guarded. "Miss Charlotte, Mr. Julian's younger sister." "Does she still live here?" Helen shook her head, avoiding Emily's gaze. "She's gone. But I advise you, Miss Morgan, don't ask about Charlotte. No one is permitted to speak her name in this house." "Why not?" "Because some names carry things that should remain buried." Emily stopped asking, but something in her stirred, a quiet thread of fascination that tangled itself around her thoughts. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She wandered toward the west wing, where the hallway flickered with the dull light of oil lamps. And then she saw the old wooden door. It was unlike the others, weathered, scratched, and marked with a single word: Charlotte. She stepped closer, raising her hand toward the handle. Footsteps. She quickly ducked behind a column, heart pounding. Julian. He walked slowly down the corridor until he stood before the door. He didn't knock, he didn't open it. He simply stood there, silent. His fingers brushed the wood. In the dim light, Emily saw something she hadn't before. Emptiness carved into his expression. Then he turned and walked away, quietly, like he had performed this ritual countless times. Emily didn't move until the footsteps faded into nothing. The next morning, she asked a young maid who was cleaning the room. "Who was Charlotte?" The girl froze. I don't know, miss." "Julian still visits that door every night, doesn't he?" The maid hesitated, then bowed her head. "I'm not allowed to speak of that. I'm sorry." It wasn't the answer Emily wanted, but it was enough to confirm the truth. Charlotte was a forbidden name, a part of this house, a soul that had never been set free. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the name Charlotte. She had tried to ignore it, told herself some secrets were better left untouched. But night after night, the image of Julian standing silently before that door returned to her, like a reminder that something deeply important was being kept from her. That morning, with Julian gone early for business, Emily made a decision, one her conscience had been urging since the day she arrived. She would search for the truth. The Blackwell Estate Library sat at the north wing, a vast room with vaulted ceilings and bookshelves that stretched to the sky. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, aged paper, and the hush of time. Emily walked in quietly, letting her fingers trail along the spines. Financial law, classical philosophy, British history, investment records. Nothing hinted at Charlotte. But then, tucked in a shadowed corner near the fireplace, she spotted a low wooden cabinet, out of place, modest, and ancient. She crouched down, testing the lock. It clicked open easily. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook, frayed at the edges. Charlotte Blackwell, handwritten on the first page. Emily sank into a nearby armchair, took a deep breath, and began to read. Charlotte's handwriting was soft, yet firm. The opening lines were heavy with dread. "They think I don't know, that I'm just a naive girl in their world. But I've seen, I've heard, I know what they're doing." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. The Monroe Children's Foundation isn't charity. They don't save children, they sell them. I've seen the lists, I've found the files, I have the proof. Each page revealed a growing nightmare. Charlotte had uncovered a human trafficking network disguised as a philanthropic organization, and at the helm was Vivian Monroe, a family friend, a revered name among New York's elite. "If I disappear, it means they found out, but I've hidden everything. Julian will know where to look." The final page was partially torn, the words frantic, unfinished. "I can't trust anyone, but if Julian finds this, please, don't let the truth stay buried." Emily closed the journal, her heart thundering. Charlotte hadn't vanished. She'd been silenced because she knew too much. Emily clutched the diary to her chest, eyes stinging. Charlotte had stood alone against something monstrous. And if Julian still visited that door every night, maybe, just maybe, he never truly let her go. The library door creaked open. Emily froze. Julian? He stood there in a gray suit, car keys still in hand, eyes sharp and stormy. His gaze fell to the diary in her hands. He didn't need to ask. "You shouldn't have read that," he said quietly. Not coldly, but with pain. Emily didn't reply. She simply whispered, "I don't think you ever forgot her." Julian stopped in his tracks, and for one fleeting second, his expression cracked, not from anger, but from a grief that never stopped bleeding. Emily had never seen Julian like this. Gone was the cold gaze, the commanding presence. Standing before her now was a man struggling to hold together a glacier that had cracked long ago. In that fleeting moment, under the soft yellow glow of the library, the diary still open between them. Emily finally understood what she had only dared to sense until now. Julian wasn't emotionless. He was a man carrying a wound that had never been allowed to bleed. The pain of losing his only sister. The guilt of not being able to save her. And more than anything, a dark secret he chose to keep buried to protect something larger than himself. Perhaps it was the family, perhaps his reputation, perhaps the safety of those still left to protect. Emily looked at Julian no longer with fear or anger, but with empathy and heartbreak, because she knew that feeling well, the helplessness of not being able to save someone you loved. And in that moment, Julian was no longer her captor. He was someone who had locked himself in his own prison of silence for far too long. The moment their eyes met across the stillness of the library, something delicate, like glass, cracked quietly in the space between them. Julian didn't flinch. He didn't lash out. But the silence that followed was heavier than any storm. In his eyes was a depth of memory, buried grief, muted ash, things that had never been spoken aloud. He stepped forward, slowly. Each footfall shattered the invisible distance that had separated them in silence for so long. And when he finally stood before her, Emily knew. It was time for the truth to be spoken. "Give it to me." His voice was cold, steel-sharp. Emily shook her head. "No, I read it all. Charlotte discovered that Vivian Monroe was running a human trafficking ring disguised as a charity. And you knew." Julian froze, but only for a heartbeat. Then he gave a bitter, exhausted laugh. "And you think I just stood by? You think I'm some heartless monster?" "Then what did you do?" Emily asked, each word cutting like a blade. Julian slammed his hand on the desk. "I tried to expose her. I gave files to the police, to the press. I begged people to come forward, but one by one, they vanished or were bought off." His voice rose, but it wasn't anger anymore. It was broken desperation. "My evidence was stolen. The people who helped me were threatened. One of my closest friends, a lawyer, died in a car crash. That's when I understood this wasn't a fight I could win through justice." Emily said nothing, but her heart twisted in her chest. "So you stayed silent?" she whispered. Julian nodded, slow, like a confession. "I chose to protect what was left. I lost Charlotte. I couldn't lose anyone else." Emily stepped closer, standing face to face with him. But Charlotte didn't die because of the truth. She died because she was left alone with it. Julian looked at her, his eyes filled with pain and shadows. "You don't understand, Emily. When your enemy is an entire system, a force that can buy the police, silence officials, and make people vanish overnight, you'll understand why I stepped back." "Maybe," Emily replied, "but I can't accept that. I can't let what Charlotte uncovered be buried again." Silence. Julian wrestled with something inside him. Emily stepped closer. "You don't have her anymore," she said softly. "But right now, you have me." Julian met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no more darkness in his eyes. That night, Blackwell Manor was draped in eerie silence. Emily had just turned off the light when she heard it, a faint noise in the hallway. A footstep, soft, deliberate, not one of the servants. She opened the door and stepped out, whispering, "Is someone there?" No reply. Suddenly, a dark figure lunged from the shadows. Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth, slamming her into the wall. Emily struggled. Her heart pounded. "Don't make a sound, Lady Blackwell," the man hissed, his breath reeking of alcohol and something far more sinister. Then, bang, Julian. He burst into the corridor like a storm. The fury in his eyes was unlike anything Emily had ever seen. Without a word, he lunged, punching the attacker with a force that sent him sprawling. But Julian didn't stop. He grabbed the man's collar and struck again, blow after blow, raw and relentless. "Don't you ever touch her!" Julian roared, his voice like fire ripping through the dark. The attacker fled, leaving a trail of blood behind. Emily stood frozen, her legs trembling, her breath caught in her throat. Julian turned to her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. Tears welled in her eyes from the shock. He stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. His warmth made her shiver, not from cold, but from something deeper. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I swear I won't let anyone harm you." And then, without another word, he kissed her. It was sudden, fierce like the rain outside, but deep like a sigh that had waited years to be released. Emily didn't pull away. She felt the storm inside him, and the one inside her finally meeting in quiet surrender. After that kiss, neither of them spoke another word, but both knew something had changed. Emily sat quietly in her room, her hands still trembling. She touched her lips, where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. From the moment she arrived at Blackwell Manor, she had seen Julian as a cold, commanding figure, a shadow born of darkness, ruthless, powerful, and steeped in secrets. But tonight, when he came for her, when he struck her attacker with all the fury and fear he carried, when his hand shook as he reached for her, she saw someone else. Julian was no longer the monster whispered about behind closed doors. He was a man slowly learning how to feel, how to love. Behind the sharp gaze and stoic face were wounds still bleeding, a heart once broken, once buried under grief, and now longing for light. And Emily realized she was no longer defending herself against him. Love had not arrived with words. It came with every glance he gave her, in the way he shielded her from harm, in silences that carried protection instead of indifference. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment her heart no longer doubted. Julian had stepped across a line, and she had begun to love him. That afternoon, pale light filtered through the heavy curtains of the Blackwell Library. Emily stood quietly before the old bookshelf, her fingers brushing along worn wooden edges. She wasn't searching for anything in particular, just a feeling. And then, tucked behind the top shelf, a small wooden box lay forgotten, like it had been sleeping for years. Emily pulled it down and wiped away a thick layer of dust. Inside, an old cassette tape. Across its surface, shaky handwriting read, "If someone finds this, please listen." Below it, a name that made her breath hitch, Charlotte Blackwell. Heart pounding, Emily brought the tape to the reading room, one of the few places that still had an old tape player. The machine whirred, then a weak but steady voice filled the air. "This is Charlotte. If you're hearing this, I might already be dead." Emily gripped the armrest tightly, listening. Vivian Monroe isn't a philanthropist. She runs a human trafficking ring disguised as a charity. I've gathered the proof, documents, lists, financial records. It's all backed up. Charlotte paused. Her breathing grew heavier. "I plan to leave tonight and bring this to the police, but I'm scared. Someone is watching me. I don't know if I'll make it." Her voice trembled, choked by emotion. "Julian, if you ever hear this, please, don't stay silent. Don't let the truth be buried with me." Then, only static. Emily sat motionless, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Charlotte hadn't simply disappeared. She had been silenced for daring to speak the truth. And now her final evidence had returned. Emily brought the tape to Julian's study. His eyes darkened as she placed it gently on the table. "Charlotte gave us her final voice," Emily said. "You can't ignore it anymore." Julian was silent for a long time. His face was tense, as if he were holding back an avalanche. "I tried to protect what little remained," he said quietly. "But maybe silence was what destroyed it." Emily reached for his hand, her gaze unwavering. "It's time to end this." Julian nodded, something fierce sparking in his eyes. "All right, we bring the truth into the light, for Charlotte, and for everyone lost in the dark." 3 days later, under the dazzling chandeliers of the Carlton Rose Hotel, a glamorous charity gala hosted by Vivian Monroe unfolded with seamless elegance. Politicians, CEOs, and social elites gathered, clinking champagne glasses and exchanging polished, hollow pleasantries. Among them, Emily appeared in a deep crimson gown, her eyes sharp with smoky makeup and her lips curved into a mysterious smile. No one recognized her as the wife of Julian Blackwell, the woman who had vanished from the media spotlight after a controversial marriage. Tonight, she was Evelyn Moore, an emerging investor from Canada, intrigued by Vivian's global charitable initiatives. "So lovely to meet you, Miss Moore," Vivian said with a polished grin, though her eyes flickered with subtle scrutiny. Emily smirked. "I've heard many fine things about your work, Vivian, but I prefer to see things for myself." Vivian laughed lightly. "I assure you, you won't be disappointed." Meanwhile, upstairs, Julian moved quietly through the service corridor. Dressed as a security staff member, he approached Vivian's private office. A quick twist of a master key, and the door creaked open. Inside, file drawers slid open one by one. Julian worked swiftly, pulling out ledger books, transaction records, and, most importantly, a coded list of victims. Each line, each mark, was a veiled name, one soul sold under silence. Back in the ballroom, Emily kept her polite smile, though cold sweat soaked her back. Vivian's tone grew sharper, her questions more precise. "What sector are you in, Miss Moore?" she asked sweetly, voice silk-wrapped steel. "I invest in long-term things," Emily replied, steadying herself. Vivian tilted her head, something dangerous gleaming in her eyes. "Things you can control, I suppose?" Just as Julian exited the office, holding every piece of evidence they needed, his phone buzzed. The screen read, "Unknown number." He answered. A woman's voice, smooth, chilling, cut through the line. "If you want to see your wife alive, you'll stop. Now." Julian froze in the hallway, knuckles whitening around the phone. "Where's Emily?" he growled. "She played her part beautifully, but unfortunately, I was never as stupid as you believed." Vivian's cold laughter echoed before the line went dead. Julian stood motionless, fury beginning to roar beneath his calm. He knew this wasn't a game anymore. It was war. And Emily was caught in the crossfire between survival and sacrifice. The skies over London were heavy and gray, just like Julian's heart. He walked into Vivian Monroe's mansion empty-handed. No bodyguards, no allies, only a single black suitcase in hand, containing every asset, company share, and remnant of the Blackwell empire. Vivian sat in the lounge with a glass of wine in hand. Still the same. Julian Blackwell always knows when to surrender. Julian placed the suitcase on the table. "I'm not here to negotiate." "Then what? To beg?" He met her gaze. "I'm here to trade for my wife. This is everything you've ever wanted, isn't it?" Vivian smirked. "Clever. She's in the basement. Once I confirm the transfer, you'll be escorted to her." Julian nodded. "The transfer was completed before I walked through your door." Vivian checked her phone. Her eyes gleamed as she confirmed the transfer. Millions in assets now belonged to her. Delicious. At that moment, the front doors burst open. Federal agents swarmed in, guns raised. "Vivian Monroe, you're under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, and murder." Vivian shot up in fury. "What?" Julian stepped back, calm and cold. "You forgot. I always keep one last card." He pulled a tiny USB from his coat. "I sent a full backup of your data to the FBI the night I broke into your office." Vivian screamed as agents cuffed her hands behind her back. Julian didn't stay to watch. He dashed to the basement, his heart pounding, feet echoing down the cold stone halls. In a dim, narrow room, Emily sat bound to a chair, her face pale and weak. When she saw Julian, her eyes lit up. "Julian!" He dropped to his knees, cutting her restraints with trembling hands. "I'm here. I've got you." Her voice was faint. "You came alone? You gave it all up for me?" He held her close, gently brushing her tangled hair. "I didn't lose anything. because I found the one thing that truly matters, you. In the damp silence of a place built for secrets and pain, two souls once imprisoned by the past found freedom in each other's arms. No more power, no more pride, only love. In Julian's arms, Emily couldn't hold back her tears. It wasn't just relief from surviving, it was the overwhelming feeling of being loved, chosen, and protected. Completely. She had once been a girl forced into a strange household, feeling like a prisoner in a gilded cage. But now she was no longer a pawn in someone else's game of power. She was herself. A woman loved by a man, not out of duty, but because his heart could no longer deny what it felt. She leaned her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. In that moment, Emily understood. No matter how broken the past, love had the power to heal it all. Outside, the sirens had faded. The darkness had begun to lift, and within Emily, a new light had begun to shine. A year later, that light had become a guiding flame, leading them into a new journey where love answered every loss with hope. By the next spring, Blackwell Manor had become something entirely different. No longer a house of darkness, secrets, or sorrow. Its once gloomy walls were now painted in soft ivory. The heavy iron gates stood open wide, welcoming the sound of children's laughter echoing through lavender-filled gardens. Emily stood on the front porch, her gaze gentle as she watched the children run across the sunlit courtyard. In her arms were two tiny lives, a baby girl and a baby boy, twins. Julian walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and their children. The shadows that once haunted his face were gone, replaced by a warmth that glowed under the afternoon sun. "Our daughter's name is Charlotte," Emily whispered, "because she deserves to be remembered forever." Julian nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "And the boy, Elliot, the name you once said you loved." They looked at each other. No more words were needed. Blackwell Manor was now an orphan care center, a sanctuary for children once abandoned and afraid, just as Charlotte had once dreamed. Emily reached for Julian's hand. The same hand that once represented power and coldness now held her with tenderness and promise. "We're no longer alone," she whispered. Julian smiled and squeezed her hand. "And we never will be again." And as the wind whispered through the lavender fields of Blackwell, laughter rose into the sky, soft, free, and full of life. Two souls, once bound by silence and sorrow, had finally rewritten their story. No more tragedy, no more sacrifice. Only love and a new beginning.